Hello, and welcome to Chapter 3 of cKnoor's Guide to Having a Nice Game of Blood Bowl 2. I know I promised murder and elf bullshit, but today I'll be covering caging and turn management. Two skills that are really important if you want to up that win percentage in Blood Bowl. I'm sorry this took a while to get out. It turns out it's really tricky to talk about caging and try and cover everything because a lot of it has to do with being aware of where all of your opponent's pieces are and stuff like that. But hopefully, I've given you at least a taste of what it means to cage properly and also bust cages. But before that, turn management, and more importantly, the 2-1 grind. The 2-1 grind is a pretty common concept when it comes to Blood Bowl, and it means that for most teams, you want to win the game by scoring 2 touchdowns while your opponent only scores 1. And you do this by managing the turns of each half. So, for example, if you start the first half receiving the ball, you want to score late enough that your opponent is not able to score with the turns left in the first half, which then means that you end the first half 1-0. In the second half, of course, your opponent is going to receive. But because your opponent now is a touchdown behind, your opponent, if he or she is playing to win, then kind of have to score pretty quickly so that there are enough turns left to try and steal the ball and score again. However, of course, you're also counting on the fact that your opponent kind of want to score as quickly so that you have enough turns left when your opponent ties the game to score again, thus winning 2-1. This is also why you're going to be seeing a lot of the slower teams like Dwarves or Chaos, those type of teams, also Orcs, and to a certain extent humans maybe. You'll see these teams try and stall rather than scoring, so that the coaches aren't trying to score as quickly as possible. And the reason they're not trying to do that, if they manage to get away, is because by scoring quickly, it gives you more time to tie the game up. If you're annoyed with it, don't be. It's a legit tactic, and if you want to get better at Blood Bowl, you need to learn how to manage your turns. It's probably one of the most important things to learn about Blood Bowl. So let's talk about caging. Now, a cage is where you protect your ball carrier in such a way that your opponent can't blitz your ball carrier or have a very hard time doing so. For example, when people talk about a cage, they are usually referring to this formation. The ball carrier in the middle, and then on each corner, there's a piece. Now, this is a proper cage. There are some other formations that are just bad, like this one or this one. Don't do these for pretty obvious reasons. This one just means that your opponent can easily blitz your ball carrier, and this one just commits way too many pieces to a cage, which you incidentally can chain push the ball carrier out of. The basic cage contains 5 pieces, the ball carrier in the middle, and then 1 on every corner. This cage can, if you're playing against a very agility-heavy team, be dodged into. It's going to be very difficult. Your opponent has to dodge into 3 tackle zones, but if you have an agility 4 elf, that's still a 5+ roll. That's a 33% chance of succeeding, which is doable, but since it's so risky, your opponent is probably going to do it at the end of his turn, which in turn means that even if the split succeeds, first of all, it's going to be probably 1 die or 2 die against, because it's hard to get assists into this cage. But even under the very lucky circumstances where your opponent knocks the ball loose, he's probably moved most of his other pieces around already. So it's going to be hard for your opponent to pick the ball up. And that's why you use a cage. Now, to put up a proper cage, there are a few rules you should abide by. First of all, like I mentioned 2 times already, there's a player on each corner of the cage. Nothing more. That if you have to have more, it's okay, but you should strive to not have any more than that. Because if you have more, there's the option of your opponent chain pushing your ball carrier into enemy tackle zones. Secondly, when you put a cage up, it shouldn't base another player's pieces, because if they do, they get to block your cage next turn, which you don't want, because with a block, they can clear a path to make an easy blitz on your ball carrier. So make sure that your cage is freestanding. And that's pretty much it. You want to know how to stop one? Good. There are two main strategies for trying to stop a cage. As we reviewed, you use a cage to slow the game down so you score at the end of the half. Or score late enough that your opponent don't have time to score. The way to stop this is to make sure that the cage don't move at all. And you do this either by screening, which basically means that you put your pieces 2 and 2 as columns 1 step away from the cage. Because now your opponent can't blitz someone out of the way and move the cage forward, because there's going to be tackle zones after the blitz as well. This is usually referred to as elf screening, because what normally happens is that the opponent that's using the cage moves 1 step forward to base the opposing players, because they're feeling like, ooh, we're so strong, we can do this because we're bashy, which goes against the freestanding rule I talked about earlier. But yes, this happens because the cage needs to move forward. And then the elf, on their turn, just dodge away and move everyone 1 piece back again. So that means the cage only moves forward at most 1 square a turn. That's not going to be enough to score. The second way you could try and stop a screen is to do the opposite. Just base the opponent's players. Because remember that 5 of the players are committed to this cage. And that means that you, having 11, have some more... you have more people that you can move around. And if you can occupy your opponent's pieces' tackle zones, that means they have to block on their turn and can't move. Now, this is a pretty risky strategy if you're playing with a team that has low armor value, not much block, or any other skills. But for example, if you're playing dwarves that have high armor value and everyone has block and maybe some of them has guard, it might be doable. It might just stop the cage and be really difficult for your opponent to move forward. And the other positive with this type of aggressive pound the cage down play is that when your opponent is committing to blocking you down, that means it's going to be harder for her to rebuild the cage properly, maybe leaving you an opening where you can blitz the ball carrier. The drawback of this strategy, of course, is that if your opponent has some type of agility skills or dodge, they might be able to run away from you. One more thing I want to mention before we're done, mainly because I forgot to mention it, and then as I'm editing the guide now, I'm like, no, I should mention this. I want to give you a real-world example of how cage breaking works, because I don't feel like we've covered it. So here's the first game of Robolis Academy in Blood Bowl 2. We're playing against a Chaos team that have just used all of their rerolls, and I have elf screened properly, and my Chaos opponent is trying to break free. Dub skulls. Really, really bad. Quick turnover. Really... yeah, that sucks. But that's kind of what we were hoping for. That's why we made it hard to move them to the pitch. So now we have an option to try and put a player next to the ball carrier. And because my opponent doesn't have any rerolls left, it's going to be risky for him to dodge away. And we want our opponents to do risky stuff so we don't have to. Because it's a Chaos Warrior, of course I have to have 2 assists. I'm using a line elf, but that's fine. Here we go. Boom. Defender stumbles. Excellent. We push him out of the way. We follow up. And now my opponent has a choice next turn. Does he want to blitz free and then not use their blitz somewhere else? Or are they going to try and dodge away from my line elf and hope that that works? As you can see, I'm dodging all my pieces out here to make sure that if they decide to blitz my ball carrier, they can't move very far because I have tackle zones all over. And unfortunately, that's all we have time for in this episode. Next time, maybe we'll talk about murder, but honestly, we'll probably talk about skill builds. Which kind of includes murder if you think about it. So, until next time, let me hand off to my face and he will tell you all about the YouTube stuff. Big thanks to my voice there. If you happen to like this guide and found it useful, don't forget to like, comment down below, and subscribe if you want more Blood Bowl 2 stuff. And why not follow me on Twitch as well? That's where I live stream most of my games. Well, I guess I'll see you in chapter 4. Goodbye. Don't be a stranger.